He was small, slow, and wasn't flashy with stepovers or tricks. Andres Iniesta did it differently. He never shouted, never flexed, never even raised his voice. He simply took the ball, made it disappear, and left world-class players wondering if they even belonged on the same pitch. And over the next 20 minutes, we're going to relive every career. Andres Iniesta quietly killed, from Barcelona's most significant signings to Spain's brightest prodigies, and why none of them could ever escape his shadow. The eternal midfielder. Picture this, it's 2006 inches Paris, the Champions League final, Barcelona versus Arsenal. Ronaldinho is dazzling, Eto'o is prowling, Henry is waiting to counter. But in the middle of it all, gliding through tackles, barely breaking a sweat, is a pale, unassuming figure who looks like he could be a student on exchange rather than a footballer at the highest stage. Andres Iniesta. No tattoos, no screaming, no bulging muscles. Just a man who treated the ball like it was stitched to his boots. That night, he was still a supporting actor, playing in the shadow of Deco and Ronaldinho. But the whispers had already begun. This kid might be different. But the thing about Iniesta was this. He didn't beat you with raw power. He beat you with time. While everyone else rushed, Iniesta paused. He waited half a second longer than defenders could endure, and in that half second, he made giants look clumsy. Spain saw it first. By 2008, when La Roja lifted their first European championship in 44 years, Iniesta wasn't just a squad player anymore. He was the heartbeat. He didn't score. He didn't even assist much. But he stitched Spain's passing triangles into an art form. And from that moment on, every midfielder in the national pool understood. To play here, you had to measure yourself against him. And that's where the destruction began. Because while other legends cleared the path by brute force, a Ronaldo header, a Messi dribble, a Gerrard thunderbolt, Iniesta destroyed quietly. He erased careers not by humiliating players, but by making them irrelevant. Think about it. Spain had the deepest midfield pool in the world. Santi Cazorla, Borja Valero, David Silva, Isco, all technical geniuses, all capable of running their own national teams. But when the lights were brightest, when Spain reached finals in 2008, 2010, 2012, there was only one constant, Iniesta. He played every single major game. The rest rotated like pawns around him. That's why teammates, not opponents, often became Iniesta's greatest victims. You could spend a career preparing to inherit the throne, but as long as Andres was there, the crown was nailed to his head. Xavi called him the most complete midfielder I've ever seen. Pep Guardiola said, "If you watch the game, you don't see Iniesta. But if you watch Iniesta, you see the whole game." Even opponents, from Pirlo to Lampard, admitted the same thing. There was no way to outplay him. And here's the cruel irony. His dominance wasn't obvious. It was invisible. That's what made it so devastating. Iniesta didn't just stop your career by beating you. He stopped your career by making sure nobody noticed you were even on the pitch. Every academy graduate at La Masia, every flashy signing at Barcelona, every promising playmaker in Spain's golden generation, they all learned the same brutal lesson. Andres Iniesta wasn't just competition. He was the wall you'd never climb. And the first to discover that, painfully, was Cesc Fabregas, the golden boy Arsenal fans worshipped, the man Barcelona brought home to replace their legend. And yet, back in Catalonia, he realised something heartbreaking. You don't replace Iniesta. You sit behind him, the homecoming that failed. Cesc Fabregas. Picture the summer of 2011. Barcelona's golden generation is at its peak. Xavi orchestrating like a maestro, Busquets anchoring with ice-cold composure, and Iniesta gliding through midfields like a phantom. And then, after years of longing glances across the channel, Barca finally bring their prodigal son home, Cesc Fabregas. Cesc wasn't just any signing. He was La Masia royalty, the boy who'd captained Arsenal as a teenager, the midfielder who'd outshone seasoned pros in England and earned the respect of the Premier League's hardest men. Arsenal fans had built their hopes on him. Spain's future was supposed to be moulded around him. His return to Catalonia was framed as destiny fulfilled. The headlines wrote themselves, Fabregas to replace Xavi, or Iniesta. The question wasn't whether he'd play, but which legend he'd push aside. He even inherited the iconic number 4, a shirt drenched in Barcelona history. And for a while, it seemed like the fairy tale was writing itself. Cesc started brightly, linking with Messi, scoring goals and dazzling with his vision. But then the reality of Barca's midfield hierarchy hit. Iniesta wasn't declining. In fact, he was entering his imperial phase. Game after game, Pep Guardiola trusted the quiet man from Fuengirola to unlock defences with a single pause or pivot. Fabregas could pass, he could press, he could even score, but he couldn't vanish into space like Iniesta. He couldn't manipulate time the way Iniesta did. Cesc would start some games, against weaker sides, or when Pep experimented with rotations, but in the biggest matches, the Champions League knockouts, the Clásicos that decided titles, the World Cup finals and European championships, it was always Xavi, Busquets and Iniesta, the holy trinity. By 2012, Fabregas was living in a paradox. He was at his dream club, surrounded by friends, winning trophies, and yet he looked unhappy. He'd glance at the bench during big nights, see his name missing from the starting lineup, and realise the brutal truth. He had returned to replace a man who was irreplaceable. Pep Guardiola once described Iniesta as the most difficult player to substitute, not because he scored the most goals or made the flashiest plays, but because the entire rhythm of Barcelona's system bent around him. Even when Fabregas was on the pitch, Barca looked subtly different, slower, less fluid, less inevitable. And so, the man who'd captained Arsenal, who'd been hailed as the saviour of Spanish football, found himself adrift. The English press began whispering about his decline. Arsenal fans who once adored him felt vindicated. Maybe Cesc wasn't the world beater they'd believed. Barcelona fans, meanwhile, didn't need him. They already had perfection. By 2014, Cesc's frustration was visible. He wasn't angry, just defeated. When Chelsea came calling, offering him a key role and the promise of being central again, he didn't hesitate. He left the club he'd once begged to join. And Iniesta? He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The quiet man simply kept playing, kept winning, kept reminding the world that while talent gets you through the door, genius keeps you in the room. But if a Premier League captain and a world-class creator couldn't dethrone Iniesta, what chance did the next generation have? Thiago Alcantara, La Masia's next jewel, would find out soon enough. The heir who never was. Thiago Alcantara. When you talk about La Masia's chosen ones, Thiago Alcantara's name is always whispered with reverence. Smooth on the ball, outrageously technical, and blessed with vision that could split granite, Thiago wasn't just another graduate. He was supposed to inherit Barcelona's midfield crown. Once again, in 2011, Xavi was aging, Iniesta was still dancing, but the future belonged to Thiago. Coaches called him the next great conductor. Spanish media framed him as the perfect blend, Brazilian flair from his father Mazinho's bloodline and Spanish precision from La Masia's philosophy. And yet, every time Thiago was handed the keys to Barca's midfield, there was always that quiet figure in the number 8 shirt. Iniesta didn't run faster, he didn't shoot harder, he simply controlled time. Matches bent to his rhythm. And as long as Iniesta was on the pitch, Thiago looked less like a prodigy and more like an understudy rehearsing for a play he'd never headline. Pep Guardiola adored Thiago but couldn't justify benching Iniesta for him. Even when Xavi rested, Iniesta slid into playmaker mode and made it all look effortless. Thiago waited, and waited for an opportunity that never came. The 2012-13 season was supposed to be Thiago's breakout. Injuries to senior players opened space in the team. In fact, Thiago showed the world that season why he was so good. He delivered flashes, an outrageous roulette against Levante, a thunderous goal versus Real Zaragoza. But when Bayern Munich humiliated Barca 7-0 on aggregate, it wasn't Thiago they blamed. It was proof that Iniesta, even past his peak, was still irreplaceable. By 2013, Thiago was restless. He'd been promised 60% playing time to trigger a contract clause that would keep him at the club. He didn't get it. So when the clause activated, his release dropped to €18 million. Bayern Munich swooped in, and Pep Guardiola, now coaching in Germany, whispered, "Come, and I'll build the team around you." Thiago left Barcelona, not because he wasn't good enough, but because Andres Iniesta's shadow was too long. In an interview years later, Thiago admitted, "At Barca, you could be great and still not play, because the man ahead of you wasn't just great, he was football itself." And Iniesta? He barely acknowledged the drama. No boasts, no headlines. Just another season of gliding past defenders and splitting backlines, while Thiago, one of Europe's most gifted midfielders, built a career elsewhere. Thiago went on to shine at Bayern, winning trebles and Champions Leagues, but even at his peak, comparisons to Iniesta haunted him. Spanish fans remembered that he wasn't supposed to be just great. He was supposed to be the successor. And every time Barcelona searched for an heir to Iniesta, the unspoken truth lingered. There would never be one. After Thiago's departure, they went shopping for another chosen one, someone who could finally step out of Iniesta's shadow. They thought they'd found him in a tall, elegant Portuguese midfielder with perfect technique and a Champions League medal already in his pocket. The forgotten heir, André Gomes. After Thiago's exit, Barcelona thought they had found another heir. In the summer of 2016, Barcelona thought they'd solved their future. €35 million for André Gomes, tall, powerful, silky on the ball. At Valencia, he'd been a revelation, a midfielder with both muscle and artistry. Barca fans saw him as the man to carry their legendary midfield into the post-Iniesta era. He was supposed to be the bridge between generations, the heir apparent to the greatest creative engine the club had ever known. But standing next to Iniesta was a curse. Luis Enrique dropped Gomes into central midfield alongside Busquets and Iniesta and expected him to blend in seamlessly. On paper, his profile was perfect, strong enough to protect the ball, technical enough to keep Barca's tiki-taka rhythm. Yet every touch, every pass, every movement was magnified. Playing beside Iniesta didn't just expose flaws, it made them glaring. Renato Goncalves put it bluntly, Gomes just wasn't good enough in central midfield for Barca, but the reason was because Luis Enrique was asking him to be Xavi or Iniesta when his skill set is completely different. Under that weight, Gomes crumbled. The very traits that made him shine at Valencia, his stride, his dribbling, looked clumsy in a system where the ball moved at light speed. As the season dragged on, the pressure became unbearable. Gomes admitted later that he sank into depression. Every mistake was amplified by fans at Camp Nou. When Paulinho, of all people, began looking like the less bad option, the narrative was written. André Gomes wasn't a future icon, he was a failure. And then came Valverde's 4-4-2. Gomes would thrive as a wide midfielder, shielded from the intensity of the middle. But even there, next to Iniesta's effortless mastery, he looked lost. The Brazilian journalist summed it up cruelly. The saddest part? Gomes wasn't a bad player. He was a good player in the wrong orbit. Standing next to a genius makes you feel ordinary, and at Barca, ordinary isn't tolerated. By the time he left for Everton, he wasn't just a flop. B was a cautionary tale. His confidence was shattered. His career, while not over, was permanently scarred. Iniesta didn't need to tackle him, outmuscle him, or humiliate him in a duel. All he had to do was play his game, and in doing so, he destroyed another hopeful successor before the world's eyes. But Gomes wasn't the only one who felt Iniesta's quiet, devastating gravity. Because even beyond Barcelona, in the Spanish national team, other midfielders, some of the country's brightest, would learn that sharing a pitch with Iniesta was like standing next to the sun. You'd inevitably disappear in the glare. Spain's golden generation was brimming with talent, but for some players, Iniesta's dominance meant their dreams of defining an era for La Roja were quietly extinguished before they even began. The midfield mirage. Santi Cazorla and Borja Valero. In 2012, Spain's midfield was overflowing with brilliance. Xavi and Iniesta were untouchable. Busquets was the anchor. Behind them waited Santi Cazorla, Villarreal's magician, and Borja Valero, a conductor who made Fiorentina sing. Both were technically perfect, small, nimble, with a passing range that could stretch continents. On paper, they should have been legends in red. Cazorla, especially, seemed destined for greatness. His feet could hypnotize defenders, and his vision split defenses apart. At Villarreal and Malaga, he'd been the heartbeat of everything good. Borja Valero, meanwhile, was a purist's dream, a deep-lying artist who could control a game without breaking a sweat. But sharing a pitch with Andres Iniesta was like trying to paint beside Picasso. Every time Cazorla or Valero stepped into Spain's midfield, the contrast was brutal. Iniesta didn't just make passes, he made poetry. His control under pressure, his ability to glide past three players in a phone booth, turned even world-class midfielders into shadows. Euro 2012 was their chance to break through. Spain needed rotation, and Cazorla and Valero were supposed to provide it. But when the games mattered, Del Bosque always turned to Iniesta. Cazorla played cameos, Valero barely featured. Even in friendlies, when Iniesta took a rest, the Spanish rhythm felt duller. Fans and pundits didn't blame Cazorla or Valero. They simply understood the truth. Iniesta wasn't replaceable. Cazorla later admitted in interviews that competing with Xavi and Iniesta felt impossible. Valero, too, saw his international career shrink to a handful of caps. Not because he lacked quality, but because Spain already had a player who made everyone else look expendable. The cruel part? Cazorla and Valero weren't failures. They were victims of timing, two greats condemned to watch a greater one define an era. The golden boy who never took the crown. Isco. When Spain's golden generation began to fade, the nation searched desperately for the next magician. For a moment, that magician had a name: Isco. By 2013, the Malaga playmaker was football's new obsession. He wasn't just good, he was dazzling. Close control that belonged in a museum, hips that sent defenders flying, and the swagger of a player who looked born to wear Spain's number 10 shirt. At Real Madrid, he danced between Galacticos, outshining bigger names on Champions League nights. Even Iniesta himself praised Isco's elegance, hinting the throne might one day be his. But inheriting a crown is different from wearing it. Every time Spain needed a midfield saviour, Iniesta would step forward and remind everyone whose era it was. In Euro 2016 and the 2018 World Cup, when matches tightened, coaches trusted Iniesta's calm over Isco's brilliance. Even when Iniesta was aging, his decision-making and timing eclipsed Isco's flashes of genius. The pressure weighed on him. In Madrid, he fought for minutes behind Modric and Kroos. For Spain, he was brilliant in bursts but invisible when it mattered. There's a reason the most shared Isco highlight reels are friendlies and group stage games. The knockout rounds still belong to Iniesta. By the time Iniesta retired from the national team, Isco's moment had slipped. Injuries, inconsistency, and coaching changes left him stranded. Once hailed as the Prince of Spanish football, he became another name in the long list of midfielders who discovered the cruel truth. You don't replace Andres Iniesta. The legacy of silence. Ask any midfielder from Spain's golden years to name the player who defined their era, and the answer comes without hesitation: Andres Iniesta. But what makes his story different isn't just the trophies, it's the wreckage of talent left in his shadow. Cesc Fabregas once admitted, "When Iniesta played, you never felt like the protagonist, you were the supporting act." Thiago Alcantara called him the reason I learned humility. Even Andre Gomes spoke openly about the depression that followed constant comparisons to Iniesta. Santi Cazorla joked on TV that every training session with Spain was like an Iniesta highlight reel. You'd leave wondering if you even knew how to play. This wasn't arrogance or bullying. Iniesta didn't need to humiliate anyone with words. He did it with the ball. The silent turns that sent world-class defenders the wrong way. The perfectly weighted passes that unlocked defences while teammates blinked. He didn't just outplay opponents. He outclassed teammates who thought they were next in line. For Spain, that meant a generation of midfielders existed in permanent comparison mode. Coaches like Vicente del Bosque and Luis Enrique trusted Iniesta's calm even as younger, flashier players came through. For Barcelona, signing new heirs became a ritual, and watching them shrink next to Iniesta became inevitable. But perhaps the greatest proof of his legacy is silence. Iniesta's game had no noise, no muscle-flexing celebrations, no ego-driven interviews, and yet he left the loudest echoes. La Liga tactics shifted, Spanish academies rebuilt their philosophies, and every young midfielder studying tape today starts with the same clips. Iniesta ghosting through a press, Iniesta slipping in a through ball, Iniesta doing something impossible without making it look hard. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the strongest, but he changed football, and the men whose careers he bent, Fabregas, Thiago, Gomes, Cazorla, Isco, Valero, are living proof. Because in an era of noise, Iniesta's quiet mastery spoke the loudest, and even now, long after he's left Europe, his shadow still stretches across every midfield in Spain and beyond. As devastating as Iniesta's legacy was for his peers, he wasn't the only one who rewrote the rules without brute force. Click on the next video to relive another story of genius, or tell us in the comments whose career-destroying magic we should cover next.